Wait, what?
Hello there, and today we're going to do what I'm going to call a water cooling adventures episode. I've been continuing to play with the water cooling setup that I finished and called it mostly done back in February, and I've decided to continue to dork with it because it's a thing I do. So anyway, what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about the Detroit Thermo 5 NOS water block. I picked this up for my AMD system because that's what I own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a quick teardown on this, and then I'm going to just do a dry test fit and illustrate how to put the thing together on the AMD bracket. And I'm going to take some measurements and we'll go from there, and then I'll eventually install it on the motherboard and I'll show some footage of that too. So let's get started, eh? So what do we need to take it apart? Well, what you need is to take this guy apart is you need a 3mm Allen wrench, and this is not included with the kit. You need to buy a Allen or have one at your house. These are about $10 for the little kit, and if you get one that's also in English units as well, you're looking at sub $20 US. Not horrible really, and it's a full set of basic sizes. So in the interest of speed, I've already loosened two of these up and just had them loose, and I just had the other two in place to keep the block from flopping around. As some background, this is a Detroit Thermo is a one-man operation, and he has done a previous project where it was a pump top for a D5 pump, and I think that's about it as far as that goes. Alright, so first part is the spider, which is this dude, and there's an Intel version of the hold down as well. This is for the AM3, AM2 motherboards and so forth, and processors. So I've got this handy dandy caliper, so I'm just going to take some quick measurements and just the thickness of the material, and it is about 0.354 inches, 0.354 inches thick. And also I want to measure the depth of that hole to see how much plastic is remaining there, and so I'm just going to use the depth gauge on the caliper and try to get that flat. And I've done this previously. This is actually a previous I did this multiple times, so yeah, it's about right. So that's 0.298 inches deep in there, so you can do the math and figure out what the delta is there. So let's just set that aside. Alright, and here we have the top of the thing, and there's the nozzle. We'll get to the nozzle. This is actually a revised top. The first one I bought, or not the first one, but when I initially bought this, I was test fitting it with some SwiftTech barbs, and I was having issues getting them to fit, and here's the original. And after measuring it, this is about 10 mils smaller in diameter versus the revised top. And essentially I started over the weekend. I emailed him and we talked back and forth about what was happening. I was willing to send him the top that I was having problems with, along with a barb or two, so he could see for himself, and he had concluded, yeah, there's a real problem. I will ship you a replacement top, this dude, for free. So he shipped me a replacement over the weekend, and I had it in a timely manner. I can't complain about that aspect of service on the matter. The rubber gasket on this is relatively simple. It's just a round shape, and gaskets seem to like being round, so it's just like a rubber washer, and it sits in there pretty securely. In fact, I've had trouble, I can't get it out. So yeah, there's that piece. And let's move this aside, put that there. Alright, here's the nozzly bit, and this is made out of brass. And I weighed this just for my own amusement, really, and it weighs in at about 16 grams plus or minus 2 grams. And yeah, it's brass. It plays nicely as far as having mixed metals. There's a very, you can look that up on Wikipedia if you wish, as far as the whole galvanic differences between different metals, and this is very close and is really not even a concern. The copper base is weighs in at about 100 grams. Yeah, 100 grams plus or minus 2 grams, and just is, well, it's copper base. It's threaded, and there's bits in there, and there's obviously the little channels that he's filled in, and those are pretty fine pitch. I think they're like 20 mils, something like that. So anyway, comes with that, and then you get these bits of hardware for the AMD mount. So you get a nut, a threaded rod, a spring, a thumb screw, and a plasticky washer. You get 4 of those, and of course instructions. And when I go through the instructions, I'll read them aloud when I assemble them on the dry run mount. Okay, so let's put this guy back together. So first things first is spider mount, and this is keyed, so it has to go on this way. And as far as aesthetics go, you can kind of see from the image there's this, he has this grip top thing, and I don't care, honestly. The only suggestion I would make is actually more of a practical one, is to have some kind of marking saying this is where water flow goes in and this is where water flow goes out. Even if you just pick one and say that's where water goes in, that's good enough for me. Kind of like C is for cookie, but different. Alright, so do that, and this only goes on one of 2 ways. So, well, yeah, I can put it on that way, or I can rotate it 180 degrees. And, sorry, get my screws. And this block does have some pretty tight tolerances on it, and that's not a bad thing, actually, because if you disassemble and reassemble this block and it doesn't feel like something's fitting together correctly, just stop immediately. I'm trying to get my paws out of the way while I work, because you very likely you did something wrong. Just yeah, don't try forcing anything. Everything goes together very smoothly with minimal force. And once it's together, it feels quite solid. So now that I've got everything together, I'm going to horse on these a little bit to snug them up. There we go. And I've learned the hard way from screwing up. I screwed up my EK water block when I was first doing my experiments by just cranking on one of the screws too hard. I actually ripped the threads almost completely out of the block, the base. That was awesome. So anyway, so now we want to put this on my AM3 mount. So without a motherboard, because this is a dry run, what do you need? Well, you need your AM3 mount. So you need to just take this off the motherboard. I so happen to have air cooling on this no, I don't have air cooling on this. What am I thinking? This is a different motherboard. This is a AM3 mount for a different motherboard that has air cooling, but same idea applies. So need that. These are Phillips head screws, so therefore I need a Phillips head screwdriver, and then these just come right out. And I'm only going to do one of these just for the purpose of brevity, because once you've seen me install one, You've seen all of them installed, and it's kind of a redundant exercise. And all we really need is just the base that holds the motherboard, holds on the back of the motherboard. So we need this part. Now we also need a 5/16 nut driver to drive these nuts here, or it's driving me nuts. So what I need to do is I need to take that off, take those off. So I got my washer, my spring, my nut, and I just have my threaded rod here, and the thumb screw can come off as well. And so this screws into here, and run it through so there's a little bit sticking out, and then I get my nut, and this is just to hold this rod in place. So I want to start this by hand without stripping it, because it's not what you want to do. There you go. So now it's started. Get in a happy spot there, and take my nut driver and then just crank on it, and now it goes nowhere. So that's going to stay put. And then I repeat that process for the other 3 rods, and we're done. So let's imagine that I did that. I'm going to put our water. So then I've put those 3 rods in there, the motherboard's there, put my processor, the heat sink paste. Don't eat the paste though. Stick the block in, and the spring goes on top, and then the plastic washer goes there, and then the instructions explicitly say when you install this thumb nut, or thumb screw, yeah, thumb nut I guess, install it with the plastic side down. So metal side up, plastic side down. So this dude goes on like that, and then you just start screwing it down. Now the other important thing in the instructions is, and I'm going to read this aloud and show you the image that's supplied, that is, tighten the thumb nuts evenly until the coils of the springs are almost touching each other. Do not fully compress the springs such that the coils touch each other, as excessive force could be applied to the water block and motherboard. In other words, don't moosh the spring all the way down. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a pitfall there, as far as, you know, someone just doing this right out of the gate, especially if you're in a rush. And I've learned the hard way multiple times when doing water cooling. Don't rush stuff. It just ends poorly for you. So anyway, I'm going to pause for a moment and come back with some ideas on things I'm going to try when I actually install this on the motherboard. This is what I'm planning on trying when I actually formally mount this in the motherboard, or at least I'll try it first, and then we'll see how everything fits together. So what I've done is I went to my local hardware store, because the mounting system, I wasn't super excited by the mounting system. I knew it was kind of limited in terms of, well, machining and, you know, picking off the shelf parts to accomplish that goal. And it's like, okay, that's understandable. I don't even know where you buy springs like that. So I thought, hey, maybe my local hardware store. So I went to my local Ace Hardware, and I spent $5 in hardware that I only needed a portion of that, actually. But the first thing I bought was some of these little spring lock washers. And so on the bottom, I inserted that spring washer between the base of the plate and the nut. So essentially now it's really and truly not going anywhere, because that nut is not going to loosen willingly. So that's really a minor mechanical improvement, and those were 15-cent washers, so not a huge deal there. And those are number 6 by 32 washers. So let's place the block now in our imaginary fit, and springs go on. Now, instead of using the plastic washers and thumb screws, I found these little metal grommets, and there's really, I think these are more of a decorative thing to deal with like a countersunk screw, but they seem to fit on these springs relatively well, as you can see. So they cap the spring reasonably, and there's not a whole lot of play there, and it's designed for a number 6 screw as well. So those are going to be my new experimental washers there, because they're not going to wander off on their own unless I drop them and catch them. So there. Now, the thing I wasn't sure about is how much tension was I going to need to put down here. So I actually bought 2 things. I bought these little brass acorn nut tops, and these fit down here, but of course they don't have enough, because there's also, it won't push all the way down, because in this case there's no motherboard or processor there. But I also found these little brass ones that are roughly the same size as these, you know, as physically the same size, and of course the same threading. And these are kind of nice, because hey, I like metal things over plastic things. Metal just rusts, plastic breaks down occasionally. So yeah, that's going to be my plan. And of course I will be doing a formal test fit with a motherboard involved when I get that far. Here we go. And I guess if I wanted to be super fancy, I could, and if there's enough space on the rods, I could put these little acorn tops on there, but that's purely cosmetic. I just kind of picked them both up because I wasn't sure. Yeah, that looks kind of nice, doesn't it? So there you go. If you want to go aesthetic, you can add those little guys on top, and then it looks real purty. So anyway, going to again stop, and I'm going to then set up the motherboard for that part of the test fit and the rest of this video. So instead of boring you with questionably lit footage of the water block, I thought it'd be better just to do a slideshow, since my camera tends to take better pictures than video. As you can see, I got the Detroit Thermo block installed on the motherboard, and I also used the modified mounting hardware that I showed earlier, and it turns out the brass acorn nuts did make the mount look a lot nicer. You can also see how the metal washers cup the springs. I'm not sure if I compressed the springs too much or not. The rule of thumb I used was if I could easily wedge my fingernail between the coils, it was loose enough. Still, this is an inexact method and illustrates where the 5-NOS needs improvement. Ideally, a spacer to limit the spring compression might be the ultimate way to go in terms of making sure proper tension is applied to the CPU. I initially wanted to do some performance comparisons between the 5-NOS and the Swiftech Apogee HD that it replaced. Unfortunately, I ran into some other problems along the way. Specifically, my nickel-plated EK blocks was corroding. So during the teardown, I had to make a bunch of different changes to the system as a whole. The 45-degree fittings I added were a big improvement versus the horrible 180-degree PVC bends I was initially using. I also replaced the EK GPU block with another one from Swiftech. After having the system in service as you see it for about a month, my temperatures were about on par with what I had before I modified the system last time. However, my flow rate has significantly improved. Before, I was struggling to maintain a flow rate of about 4 liters per minute with 3 pumps running in series. Now I'm maintaining a consistent average flow rate of 4.5 liters per minute using only 2 of those 3 pumps. Using the third pump ramps my flow rate between 6.5 and 7 liters per minute. The short answer is, whatever restriction that was present in my setup before, it's gone now. It's a safe bet the low restriction of the 5-NOS contributed to that fact. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Spider mount, does whatever a spider mount does. Spins a web? No, it can't. That's because it's not alive. Look out. Here comes a spider mount.